They stopped him before he could step past the gate, questioned his boarding pass, called over security, and never once paused to consider that the man they were sidelining held the authority to impact a $48 million partnership with their airline. There was nothing out of place about Malcolm Reid that morning. His charcoal suit was crisp, his shirt collar perfectly aligned, every movement deliberate, measured. He walked through Hamilton International Airport's Terminal C like someone familiar with 6 a.m. flights and 10 p.m. boardrooms. In his left hand, he carried a soft leather garment bag. In his right, a first-class boarding pass to Baybridge, where he was scheduled to give a keynote at the West Coast Agriculture and Sustainability Forum. At 58, Malcolm had done this routine more times than he could count. He wasn't flashy, didn't crave the spotlight, his power lay in quiet control. But something in the air felt different that morning, something brittle. The line at Gate C-12 hadn't yet formed. A few scattered travelers stood nearby, sipping coffee, thumbing through emails. Malcolm approached the desk calmly, offered a courteous nod to the young gate agent, and extended his boarding pass. She didn't scan it. Instead, she looked at him, then looked again, slower this time. The kind of double take that signals confusion, maybe even disbelief. Malcolm said nothing. His expression was neutral, his posture easy. No urgency, no tension. "This lane's for premier class only," she said sharply. Too sharply for such a casual moment. "I'm aware," Malcolm responded in an even tone. She blinked, hesitated, then finally moved to scan the pass. Her hand hovered over the scanner, but she didn't click. She glanced toward her colleague, whispered something. The second woman leaned to peek at Malcolm, eyes narrowing. Still, Malcolm stood still. "I'm going to need to see some identification," the gate agent finally said. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. "That's not standard at the gate. Is there an issue?" She hesitated. "It's just a safety step." There was no safety protocol that involved checking IDs for boarding passes at the gate. Not at Skylinks Airlines, not that he or she didn't know that. Malcolm calmly removed his wallet, passed her his driver's license. She held it awkwardly, like she wasn't sure what came next. Then, without scanning anything, she placed it on the desk. "One moment, please." He glanced down at the pass again. His name was clear, Malcolm Reid. Still, he said nothing. The agent stepped away, this time approaching someone in a dark blazer with a security badge. Within seconds, a uniformed officer was walking toward them. Malcolm had seen this pattern before. Not often, but enough. The moment when someone stopped seeing you as a customer and started seeing you as a disruption, not because you did something wrong, but because you didn't match the image they had of someone in first class. The officer didn't speak, just stood next to Malcolm, arms crossed, assessing him silently. Malcolm didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or raise his voice. He wasn't going to play the part they seemed ready for. Instead, he stepped aside, away from the gate and the growing line of travelers. From his inner coat pocket, he pulled out his phone. One call. It rang once, twice. "Nina, it's me. I need the full contract we finalized with Skylinks Airlines, the catering and produce agreement we signed 2 weeks ago for their West Coast flights." There was a pause. "Yes, I'm at Gate C-12. I'll hold." He stayed on the line, eyes forward, voice steady. No panic, no irritation, just stillness. The gate agent peeked over her screen. She noticed he was still standing there. She leaned into the microphone. "Just working through a minor technicality, folks. Thanks for your patience." But no one was patient. A man in a gray sweater leaned toward another and whispered, "What's the holdup? He cause a problem or something?" Malcolm heard it. He didn't turn around. Nina came back on the line. "Got it. Want me to loop in legal?" "No, just flag it. They'll figure it out soon enough." He ended the call. slipped the phone back into his pocket, still holding the boarding pass, still waiting, like he might be catching an elevator instead of a flight. But that call wasn't a complaint. It was a warning. Malcolm Reid wasn't always a man in tailored suits. He was raised in Fairgrove, Ohio, in a house with creaky floorboards and louder mornings. His mother, Gloria, worked in the produce aisle of a corner grocery. His father, Wallace, juggled night shifts at the local mill and weekend auto repairs, just to make ends meet. They never had much. But the kitchen never lacked for food, and the house never lacked for purpose. By 15, Malcolm was up at dawn every Saturday, helping his mom sort through boxes of melons and apples before the store opened. It was where he learned the difference between a ripe cantaloupe and a soft one just by feel, where he learned how to spot a bad apple from across the room, and where he learned the most important lesson of all: talk to people, not at them. There's a difference, and Malcolm had carried that difference all the way from that small-town produce section to the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies without ever raising his voice. Malcolm Reid understood the value of connection early, not just the kind that moved business forward, but the kind that held people together. By 23, he'd graduated from Oak Ridge State University with a degree in agricultural economics and exactly $330,000 in savings, every cent earned through side gigs, grants, and summer harvest work. He didn't start with a boardroom. He started with a roadside tent. Just off Route 19 outside Willow Bend, Malcolm set up his first produce stand. No staff, no inventory system, just a borrowed pickup truck, a sun-bleached canopy, and a determination to sell sweet corn like it was hand-wrapped gold. The real pivot came in his early 30s, when Malcolm noticed a problem no one else was solving, a gap hiding in plain sight. Grocery chains were demanding volume. Small farms had the quality, but no one was connecting them sustainably. Everyone else was trying to build boutique, artisanal brands for farmers' markets. Malcolm thought differently. Real food, grown clean, delivered quickly. No frills, just trust. That's when Reid Harvest Collective was born. In a rented garage outside Crescent Hill, Malcolm launched his logistics-first food company with one regional delivery route and a glitchy laptop that froze more often than it worked. He personally drove produce loads. He negotiated every contract. He shook every farmer's hand. Over time, he created a supply web spanning the entire Midwest. 15 years later, Reid Harvest was a name at the national table. The company supplied over 30 premium grocery brands, 5 large university systems, and most recently, Skylinks Airlines, the very airline whose staff had flagged Malcolm for simply standing in the wrong line that morning. Skylinks had approached him after a slew of complaints and social media backlash about their in-flight meals. Passengers had called them bland, wasteful, forgettable. The airline needed reinvention, not marketing, so they turned to Malcolm. He didn't start with a sales pitch. He started by listening. Then, he gave them a plan. Seasonal menus, direct farm-to-flight sourcing, low-waste packaging, and onboard meal options that actually tasted fresh. Skylinks signed a $48 million contract. But even after that, Malcolm didn't change much. His office, tucked in a modest industrial park in Maplewood, Ohio, had no awards on display, no glowing press quotes framed on the wall. Just a photo of his first produce stand and a mural-sized collage of handwritten thank you notes from family farms across the country. Nina Carter, his assistant, handled everything logistical. Malcolm? He focused on the people. He never talked about influence, never threw his name around. And above all, he hated drama, which is why, that morning at Gate C-12, when the gate agent looked more at his face than his ticket, and when the security guard approached him not as a guest, but as a question mark, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was familiar. No matter how many deals he signed or how many menus he helped revamp, There were always people who only saw what they expected to see. And when someone didn't match the mental picture they'd built, they started scanning for a reason to disqualify them. But Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He let his past and his presence do the speaking. The phone call he made earlier, that wasn't a complaint. It was a courtesy call, a chance for Skylinks to handle this without headlines. Because Malcolm believed in grace, but he also believed in standards. None of that mattered at Gate C-12, of course. To the woman at the desk, he wasn't the architect behind their new food program. He was just a passenger with a name she didn't recognize, in a seat she didn't think he belonged in. Her name was Lena Wilcox. Mid-30s, new to the city, new to the role. She'd transferred from Tulsa Regional Airport to Hamilton International a month earlier. Her training emphasized one thing: maintain control, follow procedure, and never let anyone blur the lines. What Lena hadn't developed yet was instinct, the kind of social intelligence that teaches you how to read people, not just policies. By then, passengers were lining up. A man in a navy windbreaker with a Bluetooth earpiece paced up front. A woman with a floral roller bag tapped her phone behind him, frowning at the holdup. Lena touched her shoulder mic. "Might need an extra pair of eyes at C-12, she muttered. She glanced again at Malcolm, standing calm, unshaken, just far enough from the counter to show he was still waiting, not retreating. Her colleague, Imani Patel, leaned over. "Is there actually an issue?" Lena shrugged. "He says he's premier." Imani raised an eyebrow. "The pass says he is." "So?" Lena's face tightened. "It just doesn't feel right." That's when Imani's body language shifted, subtly but clearly. Shoulders pulled back, eyes narrowing, a silent signal. "Be careful." But Lena didn't notice. She was too busy pretending to search for a flag in the booking system that wasn't there. The security officer remained nearby, arms folded, stealing glances at Malcolm without offering so much as a word. First-class boarding had already begun, and the line was thinning. Yet the gate remained stalled. Lena looked increasingly uneasy. But she didn't want to lose face, not this early in her new assignment. That's when Malcolm's phone rang. He stepped a few feet away and answered. It was Nina. "I've already sent an alert to their regional VP," she said, voice steady. "Also flagged Tobias King, the guy who heads their culinary integration team." "Thank you," Malcolm replied calmly. "Keep me updated." He ended the call. Still no emotion, just poise. Back at the counter, Imani leaned toward Lena, voice low. "Do you know who that is?" Lena blinked. "No." "Why?" "I think that's Malcolm Reid. I saw his name on the vendor brief last week. He runs the company we just onboarded. The new produce supply deal?" Lena's stomach sank. She looked over at Malcolm again. He hadn't moved. His pass was still in hand, still waiting. "Maybe we should just board him," Imani offered. Lena hesitated. But she wasn't worried about policy anymore. She was worried about optics, hers. And while she panicked in silence, Malcolm remained composed, not because he didn't care, but because he knew exactly how fast the tide could turn. Back at the check-in desk, Imani was growing visibly uneasy. She pulled Lena aside and whispered, "Do you even realize who that is?" Lena blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "That's Malcolm Reid," Imani said, keeping her voice low. "I saw his company on the onboarding brief last week, the new produce contract with Skylinks." Lena's stomach twisted. "Wait, what?" "Yeah," Imani nodded. "He owns Reid Harvest Collective. They're the ones handling our new food program." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She looked back at Malcolm, who hadn't moved a muscle. His boarding pass was still neatly held in his right hand. No signs of frustration, no outburst, just calm. And that calm, somehow, made her feel even smaller. "Maybe we should just let him board," Imani offered gently, already bracing for the fallout. But Lena panicked. "No," she hissed. "If we do it now, it'll look like we're—" She didn't get to finish. A voice crackled through her earpiece. "Lena, I need a live status on the hold at gate C12, the supervisor said, irritation barely hidden. "We've got a delay flag on your flight." Lena froze. "It's just a passenger issue. But it's under control." The supervisor wasn't buying it. "Fix it. Corporate execs are flying through this morning. No surprises." Lena tried to steady her breath. She glanced again toward Malcolm, whose steady presence hadn't changed. His silence filled the gate like pressure in a sealed jar. She realized, too late, that she wasn't just handling a delay. She had become the delay. Omani took a hesitant step toward Malcolm, ready to say something, anything, but was interrupted by the sound of the boarding door beeping open. A passenger in khakis walked through, then turned and asked, "What's the holdup over here?" Lena didn't answer. Her voice had disappeared entirely. Malcolm, meanwhile, took one slow step forward, not to the counter, but toward the wide terminal window. He stood in front of the glass, hands clasped behind his back, watching a line of luggage carts inch across the runway like ants at work. He wasn't worried. He was watching time do the work for him. Lena, on the other hand, was running out of it. She didn't know it yet, but the people who did know who Malcolm was, the ones with real authority, were already en route. 10 stories above the concourse, in a corner office overlooking the runways and the skyline beyond, Celeste Navarro was halfway through a croissant and a vendor compliance report when her desk phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the call had been forwarded twice and flagged by her assistant as urgent. "This is Celeste," she answered. "Hi, Celeste. Nina Carter calling on behalf of Malcolm Reid, CEO of Reid Harvest Collective. We've just been made aware of an issue involving Mr. Reid at gate C12. Celeste's posture shifted. "What kind of issue?" Nina's voice remained completely composed. "It appears your staff has denied him boarding, despite a valid first-class ticket. We'd like to avoid escalation." Celeste didn't ask for more context. She didn't need to. She'd seen Malcolm Reid's name enough times this past quarter to know the gravity of the situation. After Skylinks' disastrous food service press coverage, Reid's company was the centerpiece of their brand overhaul. This wasn't just an internal misstep. This was a lit match inside a storage room full of fireworks. "I'll handle it," Celeste said, already on her feet, grabbing her jacket. She turned to her assistant. "Pull Marcus and Elise from Brand and Guest Relations. Now." While Celeste descended to the terminal floor, a separate phone rang 200 miles away in Skylinks' headquarters in Denver. Tobias King, head of food service integration, was eating a late lunch when he picked up. "Tobias," Nina said, skipping pleasantries. "Malcolm's being blocked at gate C12. Flagged for no reason." Tobias nearly choked. "You're kidding." "I'm not," she replied. "He called it in himself." Tobias stood from the table, heart racing. "Celeste's on it. She's already moving. Then I'll prep legal, just in case." He hung up and began dialing, cursing under his breath. If this made it to the public, it wouldn't just damage the rollout. It could undo months of planning. There were launch videos in final edit, press releases queued, and Malcolm was set to be the face of Skylinks' fall sustainability campaign. That face was now being questioned by a gate agent with a walkie and no context. Down at gate C12, Lena was sweating through her blazer. The tension was no longer just coming from Omani's stony silence. Passengers were murmuring, checking their flight apps, pulling out phones. The delay wasn't subtle anymore, and neither was the discomfort. And then it happened. Without warning, a man in a navy suit with a Skylinks ID badge strode toward the gate, followed closely by a woman in crimson heels, still speaking into a phone. Celeste Navarro. She ended her call mid-sentence, lowered the phone, and scanned the scene. She didn't need an introduction. Malcolm didn't move. He simply watched her approach with that same unbothered clarity he'd held from the beginning. Celeste extended her hand, professional but direct. "Mr. Reid, I'm Celeste Navarro, Executive Director of Regional Operations for Skylinks. May I have a moment of your time?" Malcolm finally slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. He nodded once. "Of course." They stepped away from the gate, speaking just out of earshot. Behind them, Lena stood frozen. Her headset was still clipped on, but she wasn't speaking into it. Her entire body had gone stiff, as if bracing for impact. She wasn't sure if she should step in or disappear entirely. Imani didn't look at her. She didn't need to. Everyone nearby had already figured it out. Something had gone very, very wrong. "Of course," Malcolm Reid replied, stepping aside with Celeste Navarro toward a quieter area of the terminal. Behind them, Lena stood frozen behind the counter, unsure whether to follow or disappear entirely. Celeste took a slow breath. "Mr. Reid, on behalf of Skylinks Airlines, I want to sincerely apologize. I've already alerted our internal teams. This never should have happened. I'd be honored to personally escort you onto the flight." Malcolm didn't react to her words. Instead, he asked calmly, "Do you know what seat I was assigned?" She checked her tablet. "Seat 1A. A faint smile crossed his lips. "Front row. Interesting. I was told this lane was for premier passengers only." Celeste didn't flinch. "Again, I'm sorry." Malcolm leaned in slightly. "The issue here isn't the mistake, Ms. Navarro. It's the assumption behind it." Her throat tightened. Understood. But Malcolm wasn't looking for vengeance. He wasn't after a scene. What he was waiting for was something far harder to give than an apology: the truth. Back at the desk, Lena remained completely still. Her headset hung limply from her collar, no longer in use. She stared at Malcolm and Celeste, watching them talk. Their conversation was hushed, but it carried a weight heavy enough to shift the atmosphere of the entire gate. Boarding had stalled. Conversations among passengers quieted. Phones lowered. Nothing on the monitor had changed. The flight still read, "on time." But everyone could feel that something wasn't moving. Imani, standing nearby, avoided Lena's eyes. She didn't have to say anything. Everyone at Gate C12 now understood exactly what had gone wrong. Celeste turned and gave a subtle wave to a tall man walking toward them, blond, clean-cut, wearing a black lanyard and the expression of someone who had been briefed in an elevator and wished he'd been warned sooner. This was Evan Trask, Skylinks' legal liaison for East Coast operations. He approached with his hand outstretched. "Mr. Reid, I'd like to extend a personal apology. I understand this experience has been unacceptable." Malcolm raised an eyebrow, then gently interrupted. "I'm not looking for an apology, Mr. Trask. I want to understand how something like this happens after we sign a $48 million contract." Evan hesitated. There wasn't a prepared answer. No public relations script. No way to spin it. Celeste stepped back in. "Mr. Reid, we take this very seriously. We're already reviewing staff conduct and updating sensitivity protocols. Please believe me, this doesn't reflect our company's values." Malcolm's expression hardened. Is it not a reflection of the company's values? Or not a reflection of one employee's judgment? Celeste said nothing. Malcolm gestured slightly toward Lena, who was now clutching her ID badge with both hands like a shield. She saw a man in a suit holding a first-class ticket and decided, not once but repeatedly, that he was out of place. She called security the moment I questioned her logic. And let's not pretend we don't know what that's about. I've lived it. Evan cleared his throat. If you'd like a formal apology, privately or publicly, we're prepared to issue one. Malcolm didn't blink. You think I'm standing here for an apology? The two executives fell silent. Malcolm reached into his garment bag and pulled out a slim folder. No theatrics, just paperwork. "This is the signed agreement between Reid Harvest Collective and Skylinks Airlines," he said. "My company now supplies all fresh food for your Western and Midwest routes, including your executive lounges." He handed the folder to Celeste, who accepted it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "So when I tell you that the man being held at the gate today is your brand, I mean that literally." He paused. "I don't want a tweet. I don't need a letter. I want better. Because the next time your staff treats someone like a security risk for doing absolutely nothing, they might not have the luxury of a direct line to your VP." Around them, the murmurs had returned. A woman in the business class lane pretended to scroll through her phone, clearly recording everything. Evan shifted uncomfortably. "We'll begin an internal review immediately. Personnel changes will be made if necessary. You have my word." Malcolm glanced at his watch. "Good. Then let's all go about our day." Before Celeste could lead him to the jet bridge, Malcolm turned slightly, his eyes drifting back toward Lena. She looked pale now, her arms wrapped around her badge like it could shield her from the moment. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment. Celeste waved to the flight crew. The gate was unblocked. Malcolm stepped down the bridge with Evan Trask quietly following behind. Back at the counter, Imani stepped close to Lena and said quietly, "You still don't get it, do you? That man's company is the reason half the trays in first class are changing next month." Lena didn't respond. But the real moment wasn't that comment. It came just minutes later. The cabin crew had been fully briefed before boarding. As Malcolm stepped onto the aircraft, the usual polite nods were replaced by something more human. A quiet, wordless acknowledgement. A flight attendant named Jared reached out. "Let me take that garment bag for you, sir." Another approached almost immediately with a bottle of water. "If there's anything you need before takeoff," Jared added in a low, sincere voice, "just say the word." Malcolm didn't respond right away. He didn't need gestures. He didn't need fanfare. He took his seat in 1A, set the water down on the armrest, and let out a quiet breath. Not relief, just control. Measured. Familiar. He'd seen days like this before. Malcolm Reid placed the bottle of water on the tray beside him without taking a sip. He let out a breath through his nose. Not relief, just restraint. Outside the aircraft window, something strange had begun to unfold. The once busy terminal had fallen quiet. Passengers, now uneasy, repeatedly refreshed departure boards. The flight at gate C-12 had quietly shifted from boarding to delayed. Then, within minutes, 2 nearby gates followed suit. At gate C-15, a man in a gray blazer tapped on the desk, only to be told there was an internal systems check in progress. But this wasn't about one gate or one flight. Across the concourse, Skylinks departures were being paused. No clear reason, just vague phrasing. Operational hold, crew reassignment, system verification. In reality, corporate had issued a soft lockdown. A pause, a deep breath before things spiraled further. After escorting Malcolm on board, Celeste Navarro had moved directly into a private operations suite behind the terminal. She was now on a live video call with legal, HR, and crisis comms. The instruction was clear. No movement until we know how bad this is. Gate logs, staff transcripts, internal chat channels. Every employee who had direct contact with Malcolm that morning was being interviewed. Quietly, but thoroughly. No one said it out loud, but it was clear. The plane wasn't going anywhere until corporate figured out how close they'd come to disaster. Back in seat 1A, Malcolm sat with his eyes closed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't anxious. But his calm wasn't peace. It was practice. The kind of controlled stillness that comes from decades of learning to act unaffected, even when things hurt. Even when they're too familiar. He thought about his father, Wallace, who once got turned away at a dealership because the manager didn't think he could afford anything on the lot. He thought about his first investor pitch in Columbus, where he was mistaken for the valet and handed a set of keys, and he thought about how, even after all these years, all this success, it was still happening. The altitude had changed. The treatment hadn't. A soft knock at the side of his seat broke the moment. It was Jared, the flight attendant from earlier. "Mr. Reid," he said gently, "we've been asked to hold departure for a bit longer. Terminal team is still working through something." Malcolm nodded once. Jared hesitated, then added in a quieter tone, "I saw what happened back there. It wasn't right." Malcolm opened his eyes. "Thank you." There was a pause. Then Jared added, almost sheepishly, "My little brother's studying agressions. He watched your keynote from the summit last year, said it changed the way he saw food systems. You made it real? Just thought you should know." Malcolm looked at him for the first time since boarding. A small, quiet smile formed. "Not performance, just something human." "I appreciate that," he said. As Jared stepped away, the pilots emerged from the cockpit, whispering to a senior crew member. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Malcolm heard the phrase clearly. Ground hold. No idea how long. From somewhere near the back of the plane, a man groaned loudly. "Figures. This airline never gets it together." Malcolm didn't respond. He leaned back, watching the clouds drift past the window, letting the storm pass him in silence. He had done his part. The rest was never up to him. 20 minutes later, a report landed in Celeste Navarro's inbox. The gate logs were clean. No threats. No incidents. The only anomaly, a security call made by the gate agent, with no documented cause. That alone was enough. By the time the aircraft finally began its slow pushback, Lena Wilcox had been pulled from the floor. No scene, no announcement. Her name was quietly removed from the next day's schedule. That afternoon, a blurry photo surfaced online. Someone at the terminal had captured the moment. Malcolm, standing calmly near the gate, phone to his ear. The caption read, "He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. But the whole airport listened. But stories like this don't always explode online. Sometimes they ripple." The flight touched down in Bay Bridge just after 1:15 p.m. local time. Malcolm was one of the last to deboard. He moved without urgency as the other passengers hurried toward rideshare lines and baggage claim. He didn't check his phone until he was seated in the back of a black Lincoln Town car, heading toward the downtown Marriott, where the West Coast Agriculture and Sustainability Forum was already underway. The notifications were stacked. Emails from Skylink's executives, a text from Nina letting him know legal had drafted a formal letter of apology, and a link to a local news blog, a quiet write-up that had picked up whispers of the incident at Hamilton International. It wasn't viral. It wasn't trending. But it was circulating in all the right rooms. Inside the conference center ballroom, the crowd was already buzzing. Malcolm entered quietly, unnoticed at first. He moved along the perimeter, weaving through networking clusters and vendor displays. A few people recognized him and offered quiet nods. Some shook his hand. No one mentioned the airport. No one offered pity. Just business. Just how he liked it. 20 minutes later, he stood on stage, the keynote speaker to a full room of farmers, distributors, university researchers, and logistics execs. His talk? It wasn't about the flight. Not directly. His keynote wasn't about the incident at Gate C-12. Not directly. Malcolm Reid spoke about resilience in the food supply chain, about how one delayed delivery, one missed message, one bad assumption could ripple out into real loss. He told the story of a beet farmer in Kansas Plains who nearly lost an entire harvest because of a single overlooked email, and how that moment led to a full rework of his company's internal communications. He wasn't talking about airports, but he was. Near the end of his talk, he paused, looked out at the audience, a room full of business owners, suppliers, researchers, logistics experts. And then he said quietly, "Sometimes the issue isn't the system itself. Sometimes it's the shortcuts we take when reading people." The room held its breath. He continued, "Whether it's a new grower, a vendor, or someone standing at a gate with a first-class ticket, what we assume about them says more about us than it ever does about them." There was a beat of stillness, then soft applause. Not thunderous, not performative, just real. After the session ended, a man from a Seattle-based distribution firm stopped him near the exit. "Hey," he said, still digesting the message, "that part you said about shortcuts, it hit harder than I thought it would." Malcolm gave a small, knowing smile. "That's where the rot starts," he replied. "In the shortcuts." Back in New York, Celeste Navarro sat at her office desk, reviewing the full audit report from the gate incident. Lena Wilcox's file had been flagged, but Malcolm had never asked for her to be terminated. He hadn't requested compensation. He hadn't even acknowledged the offer for a formal public apology. He didn't need to. The leadership team at Skylinks understood exactly what had happened and how close they'd come to losing far more than a contract. Internally, they'd seen the metrics shift already: supplier trust, staff morale, even customer feedback. The story had stayed. Quietly, the airline announced a new partnership with a national civil rights advisory group, focusing on bias awareness, frontline training, and inclusive workplace culture. A few smaller press outlets noticed and connected the dots. One quote from a Skylinks spokesperson read, "Recent events reminded us of the work that still needs to be done." Malcolm didn't post about it, didn't comment, didn't retweet. When Nina Carter asked if he wanted to respond to an interview request from GQ, Malcolm just replied, "Tell them I'm busy feeding people." Weeks passed, then months, and still the story lingered. Not because it went viral. It didn't need to. It stayed because people remembered. People who were there that morning at Hamilton International told it at dinner tables, in board meetings, on long drives home from the airport. People who had seen the photo of him standing still, phone at his ear, shared it in PowerPoint decks about silent leadership. Flight crews who worked for Skylinks began talking more quietly in break rooms, and gate agents, the ones with the power to escalate or not, started hesitating, started asking questions, started thinking twice before reaching for a radio or calling security on someone who didn't look the part. And somewhere in a modest home in Fairgrove, Ohio, a retired grocery clerk named Gloria Reid sat at her kitchen table, reading a small online article on her tablet. She smiled, then said out loud to no one in particular, "That's my boy," because sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all.